MP, member for Kawana in the Queensland Parliament. I'm Brant Rippon, AML's co-national deputy chairman, and tonight, as per the last webinar, I'll be online emceeing again. For those of you who are members of Queensland or supporters in Queensland, you probably know who Jarrod is, but for those around the country, Jarrod was the Queensland Attorney General in the Newman government and is currently the Shadow Minister for Education and Industrial Relations. Jarrod is an honorary life member of the Australian Monarchist League and is one of our national spokesmen, and he's a very staunch supporter of the cause and the League. His tenure with as Queensland's Chief Law Officer overlapped with Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee, where he was able to support us and the cause and roll back, if I can speak on his behalf, so brashly many years of republicanism by stealth. A couple of the things he was able to achieve: he reintroduced Queen's Councils to Queensland, which was followed by all states excepting New South Wales, currently anyway. He reinstated an oath to Her Majesty the Queen for Justices of the Peace, and helped to arrange the naming of the Brisbane Law Courts Complex, which is known as the Queen Elizabeth II Courts of Law, and it's home to Queensland's Supreme Court. Before I throw over to Jarrod, just a few quick acknowledgements. Philip Benwell, obviously our national chairman, who organises these webinars and has been doing a sterling job during the COVID closure. I believe tonight we should have the Honourable Santo Santoro joining us as well online, member of the Australian Monarchist League National Council. I believe we also have Dr. Christian Rowan, friend of AML, and he's the member for Moggill in the Queensland Parliament. And I'd also like to acknowledge any of our office holders from around the country joining us tonight. We do have a couple of very notable apologies. Senator the Honourable Erica Betts, who's co-deputy national chairman of the Australian Monarchist League, and the Attorney General for Tasmania, the Honourable Elise Archer, life member of AML, has also sent in her apologies today. So the agenda tonight is same as usual, pretty much. I'll throw to Jarrod now to speak for as long as you would like, really, but 15, 20 minutes or thereabouts. And then we'll throw to a Q&A session. I'll get our resident tech guru to moderate the questions. That's Elliot Harper. So just use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Type in the questions you'd like Jarrod to answer, and he can either see them or Elliot can moderate and read them out. Mr. Bleijie, I'll throw to you. Good, sir. You are on mute. Ooh, gotcha.
Hang on.
There we go. You're good to go, sir.
Thank you, Brent. I should be used to these Zoom now. I've done
It's a way of life now.
The new world we live in. Look, thank you, Brent, and acknowledging Philip and all the dignitaries that you've acknowledged, Santo, for all your efforts over the years in Queensland and the Australian Senate and to the Monarchist League. My colleague, Dr. Christian Rowan, and of course to Philip, the National Chair. So thank you for having me tonight. The subject was pretty broad tonight, just why am I a monarchist? So what I thought I'd do is just, the biggest question I get from a lot of people is, what made you, why are you a monarchist at such a young age? Because I've been banging on about this stuff ever since I was elected to Parliament. In fact, before I was elected to Parliament, my first defence of the Crown was, of course, in 1999 with the referendum. And that's when it all started for me. I was 17 years of age at Caloundra High School, and I was the booth captain for the Vote No campaign down at the Caloundra High School. And I have the picture here of the campaign booth that we set up with the wrap along the top with the Vote No signs. This is a bit of an old picture now, so it's hard to see, but it was no more power to the politicians. Little did I know I'd be a politician a few years after that. But I stood there and defended the Crown. And the reason I defend the Crown, and I have so staunchly for years, and also not only defend the Crown against Republicans, but I also defend the Crown because of the stability it provides. And I think, if anything, we've seen over the COVID-19 crisis, the coronavirus around the globe, one person that stands out to me, and extension of that, is Her Majesty and the royal family. How they've continued to engage with the community, Her Majesty doing Zoom seminars and so forth and meetings. I think she has shown dignity and grace as she always does. And it's a real testament, because you've seen some other issues and politicians around the world and how they're handling this without dignity and grace. And I just look at the royal family and how they've handled themselves. And I think it's a testament to why we should always defend the crown. And it's not defending the Queen, Her Majesty. It's not defending particular members of the royal family. It's defending the institution. And the institution is what I hold dear. And that's why I'll defend it at every opportunity. In government, we had many of opportunities when I was the Attorney General to look at how we can strengthen the ties with the Crown. The first thing, and I know Brant mentioned a few of those, and there was a few on the list that had been sent out. The first thing that we did was in 2012, when the new law courts in Brisbane were being built, and I had the pleasure of opening them with the Premier Campbell Newman and Governor at the time, and the Chief Justice Paul de Jersey. That was in 2012, after we were elected, and the building hadn't been named. And I thought, what greater, bearing in mind this was going into Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee, I thought what greater acknowledgement than naming the law courts, the Queen Elizabeth II Courts of Law. It was very beneficial that the Chief Justice at the time, Paul de Jersey, was a big supporter as well. Otherwise, it would have created some issues. I can't say that all their honours were supportive of the move, who sat in the courtrooms in the Supreme and District Court, but I had the Chief Justice support. So the government liaised with the palace, and it's quite a effort to go through. And one day I'll release the papers with respect to, it might take just as long as the papers that have been released recently once we put them in archives. But in terms of the negotiation and the approval that we sought, and the first real fight we had was I was being told at the time that we had to go through the Federal Governor General's office, not our own governor. And I said, no, we are a sovereign state. The Premier, the government of the day, wants to name the courts in a recognition of Her Majesty. That's why we want to name Queen Elizabeth II Courts of Law. So we will put the proposal through our governor at the time. And there was so much pushback. No, it has to go through the federal office, the Governor General's office, which we just refused to do. I said, out of courtesy, we'll let the Governor General know, but this is a state court, it's a Supreme and District Court. We have our own governor. Her Majesty has her own representative in Queensland. So we liaised with our governor and sought the approval and received the approval for our governor to make connection with the palace directly. So we drafted correspondence from the Chief Justice, myself as Attorney General, the Premier at the time, and we bundled all that up and put a submission to the governor. And then the Queensland governor presented that to the palace, and with a bit of back and forward, the palace agreed. And it was, it's quite a surreal experience when you get the approval from Her Majesty, because all it comes back with is there's quite a protocol in terms of how you do it, in terms of the Premier writes a submission, a letter, but it's a duplicate copy. And then the Queen, if she approves it, simply puts her marks on it and sends the same back, which we were very delighted. So we started that in 2012. And I think importantly, in 2013, we had another issue that, if you recall, CHOGM in 2011 had agreed to make some reforms with respect to the succession of the Crown in terms of gender. And in 2011, the 16 realms agreed that there would be two reforms in terms of it didn't matter what gender you were born. If you were the firstborn, you would succeed the Crown. And we were presented with a briefing, I recall at the time in 2013, where they said that it would have to be a national law, and through the cooperation of all the attorneys general in Australia and the federal government, they would do this national law, then all the states would follow. As a sovereign state, again, Queensland said no. We will lead the charge, because if we rely on all the other states and territories in the Commonwealth to do it, we would expect it would probably not have been done to this day. So we actually led the charge in the succession of the laws, and it was called the 2013 Royal Succession Bill, regardless of gender, and we legislated that just after Her Majesty's Diamond Jubilee. In fact, it had passed the House of Commons in the UK, but had yet to receive approval from the House of Lords. So we legislated that process in the UK, but we put a provision in our bill that said laws that our laws.
Jarrod, sorry, there appears to be an issue with your microphone. Can
you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, maybe you just like to repeat that last sentence or paragraph just past, I don't know, 15 seconds. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. So we had the succession laws had gone through the UK House of Commons, but not the House of Lords. So we legislated our bill in between those two processes, but put a proclamation provision in there that our laws would start once they passed the House of Lords. So we're actually just following the United Kingdom, the first jurisdiction as a state in all the realms to actually pass the succession laws. And of course that did two things. One, it said that it didn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl, prince or princess, you would succeed to the crown if you were firstborn. And secondly, it allowed the successor to marry a Catholic without the Queen's or the Crown's permission, which wasn't allowed. So that was actually in the bill, and I can't say that it was a greatly debated bill in 2013 or presented opportunities for lots and lots of members of Parliament to speak, but it was important for the state of Queensland to recognise as a sovereign state and our direct ties to the Crown that we wanted to ensure that we were one of the first jurisdictions to pass that law. So we did that in 2013, royal succession regardless of gender, and led the every other jurisdiction in the realms on that. We then we had an issue that Brent mentioned with the Justice of the Peace in Queensland, where if you're appointed as a Justice of the Peace, the Attorney General signed off on the appointment, and a certificate was issued to the successful applicant. And the certificate, I've got to say, it had been just through the mill of bureaucracy. And I think at the time it even had, if you recall, Peter Beattie, when he was Premier, had that Queensland logo, and it was referred to as the burger, and it had
Beattie burger, yeah.
The burger. So the certificate had that all over it. It was just very government generated. So I said to the Department of Justice, what I wanted to do was actually put back a lot of the importance into Justice of the Peace and Commissioner for Declarations that had been lost. Of course, if you look at the history of JPs back in the King's Court and the Queen's Court, the history is steeped hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So we really wanted to ensure that we gave the respect to JPs that I think they deserve, because we didn't want them to just become part of a machinery of government. They're certainly part of justice, and they very much dispensing justice every day in terms of warrants, arrests, and all that sort of stuff. So we changed the certificate. We actually put the crest, the Queensland crest, on there, and we put the oath of allegiance to Her Majesty that the JPs swore. We actually put that on their certificate. And I tell you, the JPs just really appreciated it. It actually gravitated the being a JP and a Commissioner to Declarations in Queensland. And my understanding is the government haven't changed that, thank goodness. A lot of the other stuff they've changed, but that they've kept, which just, I think, put JPs on a high platform and of high office. We also, in fact, put JPs qualified in our court system, in our Queensland Civil and Administration Tribunal. We put 2 JPs or 3 JPs sitting on the bench, actually dispensing some of the minor disputes in terms of neighbourhood disputes that QCAT saw. So that was important, I think, as well. We also, in 2013, reintroduced Queen's Counsel. This, again, had the support of the Chief Justice at the time, and I know other jurisdictions have had challenges doing this in terms of the opposition from the Bar Association in their respective jurisdictions. We pushed ahead with it. One of the issues for the Bar Association Queensland at the time was they wanted to ensure that it wasn't just executive government doing political appointments for the Queen's Counsel, because they were senior counsel. They didn't want the Attorney General to be the one who decided that. And we gave them assurances. We signed actually a deed whereby the recommendations would be still made by the Chief Justice to the government of the day. The Governor, on the recommendation of the Attorney General, signed off on the appointments, but there was no ability for the Attorney General to change the appointments or not appoint anyone. Basically, it was who was recommended was given to the government, and then we made that recommendation to the Governor, and the Governor would sign off. The take-up rate was, let's go back a step. The opposition rate was quite high amongst a lot in the Bar Association, the profession, but then that opposition didn't equate to the take-up rate, because the take-up rate from senior counsels to Queen counsels was all but 3 in Queensland. Even some of the biggest detractors and opponents of the Queen's Counsel, reintroduction of the Queen's Counsel, were first lining up to take the Queen's Counsel title and drop the SC. We did it for a number of reasons. One, again, it was showing the importance of the title, and secondly, there was also in the legal profession, the title of senior counsel had developed in the legal community in terms of consultants and so forth. A lot of senior lawyers who retired were then being employed by law firms, and there was a real confusion amongst what their role was or what the respective role was. So we changed that, and that went through without any great fanfare. And as I said, that continues to this day. I know the Commonwealth followed in after that. George Brandis introduced that after we did in Queensland, and other jurisdictions. I think, Brent, you said New South Wales has not come to the party yet. I haven't followed it as greatly as I did when we were in there. So I'm hoping there'd be a uniformity with that introduction. When I was the Attorney General, we just had these things happening in terms of the Diamond Jubilee celebrations. We had lots happening in Queensland, which was great. But we also had, if you recall, between when we were in government, when I was the Attorney General, the birth of Prince George. And again, we looked as ministers at ways we could acknowledge and celebrate Prince George. So as Attorney General, I was responsible for births, deaths and marriages. So we created a commemorative birth certificate, which this was the original design of the birth certificate. And it was in celebration after the christening of Prince George. And it had there, born in the year of the birth of His Royal Highness, Prince George Alexander Louis of Cambridge, son of Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. That basically any child that was born in that year were able to apply to births, deaths and marriages for that commemorative birth certificate. And I tell you, it was very, very popular. It went off really well, and so successful it was. Lawrence Springborg at the time was the health minister, and he commissioned medallions through Queensland Health. So if your child was born in the same year, then you actually received a medallion in honour of the Prince George being born. So that was good. So look, I know I've taken a bit of time there, Brent, but I just want to conclude by saying that, look, I'll always defend the institution of the Crown. I see it as stability in times of crisis, and I think people need stability. That's why, as we go forward in the future and Republicans start their campaigns again, I'll be fiercely defending the Crown and putting the case forward as to why we shouldn't change. And we don't want, and I'm a politician, and I'll be the first to say, we don't want politicians either appointed or elected to the position of President of Australia when we have a non-political, stable institution in the Crown. And I think we have to do collectively and individually, whatever we can to defend it. So I had the opportunity for 3 years as Attorney General to try and instill a bit of that in Queensland, and look forward to the opportunity that we may have come 31st of October to look at these issues again. Thanks, Brant. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you, Jarrod, for this evening, mate, and thank you for sharing some of those insightful stories, which I don't think a lot of people, watching at home on the Channel 9 News really get to see what, as a good staunch monarchist and supporter of the cause, you're able to really achieve. So we needed a bit of reminding. I might ask Elliot to, I see we have got a few questions coming through.
More comments than questions at this stage. So if you do have questions for Jarrod, there's a Q&A icon which appears in the tray of your Zoom application. You can ask your question there. And we do have one that's just come in. So when your party forms government later this year, what do you believe education in Queensland should emphasise? Perhaps I'd add to that, and that probably not to fake your Harvard degrees, maybe, but as the kind of minister in charge of Queensland schools and universities done. But
Elliot, who is that question from?
I'm sorry, it's from Michael.
Oh, hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us tonight. Look, education in a nutshell, what we'll be taking to the election and hopefully implementing after the 31st of October will be a few things. One, decluttering the curriculum. Teachers are taking all the responsibilities for life challenges at the moment, and a lot of parental responsibilities out the window, expecting teachers to be able to do that in the limited time they do. So we really want to declutter the curriculum, give more time to the basics of reading, writing, math, and science. If you look at the NAPLAN results in Australia, in Queensland, but on average across Australia, Queensland is performing quite badly in years 7 and 9 English reading and writing, which concerns me that the Queensland Teachers Union last week announced that the Queensland government will be taking the abolishment of NAPLAN to the Council of Teachers, Ministers for Education, because why would you get rid of the very measure that shows that Queensland's doing poorly? That's the measure that shows we're doing poorly and why we should improve. There are issues with NAPLAN, it creates anxiety, and we've got to sort those issues out. It can be fixed, it can be tweaked, but certainly we'd be looking at keeping some sort of measure. The other thing we'll do is introduce a phonics screening check at the start of year 1. Lots of kids are falling behind through the cracks who are having challenges reading and keeping up with their peers. So we'll be looking at introducing that. Again, the Teachers Union are opposed to that in Queensland. The government say it's happening at the moment, which is clearly not. The federal government want it to happen. South Australia, New South Wales have implemented it, and we'll do the same. Well, they condition every state school classroom in Queensland. So that's just a bit of a few things we're looking at. But certainly, if you've seen the news lately, Grace, we called her out last week, 2 weeks ago in Parliament, for brandishing around a fake Harvard degree or master's from Harvard, which turned out all it was a 10-day certificate in trade unionism that she achieved from the Labor School in Harvard. But she had on her parliamentary bio that she had a master's from Harvard in labor law, which was just not true. So
That's okay.
Thanks for the question, Mike.
That's all right. And so many great questions come through, and I'll just jump around. So we have one from who's a young Aboriginal man asking how he can share the message of the benefits of the monarchy to those in his community. What do you suggest there to Boston?
Hi, Boston. That's a great question. It's, as I said just before, it's individually and collectively all our responsibility. Now, how we do that, it's a challenge because, as you would appreciate, getting the message out. And I think what we've got to do, a lot of the times that I struggled when I was early elected and young, and people thought I was quite bizarre, and how could a 17-year-old stand up at a high school and hand out vote no to the Republic, and how would you even understand what it is? And it's not about, as I said, it's not about the celebrity status of the royal family that a lot of people see. It's actually the importance of the institution and how beneficial it is. And I think if we've seen anything with the release of the papers of the Whitlam government recently, it shows how important the Crown was, and the independence of the Crown acting or the representatives acting independently of the Crown. With that, now how you communicate that with our communities is a challenge. These are always helpful, and I know there's nearly 40 people on the Zoom tonight. I've got a newfound respect for online communications that I never really used, or because we really didn't have the chance to do it, but now coronavirus has sort of forced that upon us. I think we have to, I know Christian Rowan's online as well, a state MP for Moggill. It's up to parliamentarians across the country to try and work out ways we can communicate this with our electorate and not be ashamed of it, not be ashamed to put our hand on our heart and say we're a constitutional monarchist. I scream it from the rooftops in my electorate of Kawana. I talk about it in our schools. Yes, Twitter hates it, Facebook hates it, but we can't stop doing it. We've got to preach it. We've got to preach it to more than the participants online tonight, because we're all preaching to the converted. So it's about a message getting out there. Hopefully, if we're in government, you've got to have a government with a will to be able to do that as well. Federally, it's very hard for like if you look at the opposition, they've got a shadow minister for the Republic. So it'll never come from the federal opposition. But certainly at a state level, there's lots of MPs who are willing to help coordinate that. And we'll keep talking to Philip and Brenna how we can do that.
Great.
Jarrod, I've got actually, if I could jump in there and be a little bit selfish, I've got a question, Jarrod. Mate, I remember having a discussion a number of years ago with our previous governor, Penelope Wensley, and at an event, and I was hoping you could give us a bit of your thoughts or inside knowledge, being a former member of the executive, and hopefully you will be again soon, an executive council, what the role of the governor is there, I guess, from your first-hand experience. I mean, obviously, a lot of members would be aware of Badgett's sort of three advise, warn, and encourage, the three sort of key roles that a monarch and their vice-regal reps have. But I remember having a discussion with her, and she said words to the effect of that, given that Queensland is unique out of any other state in Australia and that we don't have an upper house, she had it upon herself that she would sort of pay extra attention to things that came before her and ensure that she always asked a lot more questions. And she sort of apparently received that advice from her predecessor as well, and it's been passed down. It sounds like almost a little Queensland quirk that, or possibly not. I'm sure it does probably happen on the other levels, but because of sort of the confidence of what happens in executive council between the Crown and ministers, it obviously stays in house. And obviously, I won't ask you to break any of those sort of confidences or conventions, but would you be able to sort of share any sort of anecdotes, if possible, or any sort of insights to that, and how you saw the governor carry out their duty?
Sure. Well, each governor is different, and they carry out their duties differently. I'd say the administrative duties and receiving advice from the government is very similar. Discharging their public duties is quite different. You would see our current governor, Paul de Jersey, is very active in our communities. I think, in fact, today he's heading up to Townsville to do a 3-day drive, or from Cairns to Townsville. So he's very active in our community, and I know he's been particularly anxious that he hasn't been able to get out and about during the coronavirus, because he is a very active governor in our communities, particularly regional and rural Queensland, which I really like. And the people love seeing the governor in the state. So that's the public duty, and some governors are more public than others. And I think De Jersey's doing a wonderful job in terms of his public duties. And we appointed Paul De Jersey as governor in our term, of course. And he's been reappointed by the current government, which was great. Inside the Executive Council, obviously I can't disclose what happens. Suffice to say that I had 58 bills that I introduced and passed through the Parliament, and thankfully all were given royal assent by the governor at the time. But that doesn't mean the governor doesn't, from time to time, ask questions, which does happen. Wants to get more of an explanation in terms of how things will operate, particularly if there was bills where there was lots of community consultation and so forth, or very much in the public domain. I gave advice from time to time on some of my bills, which I thought was good, because it showed that the governor took an active interest in what the Parliament was actually doing, and not rubber stamping things that the government or the Parliament would pass.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, actually. I think there's a segment of Australia that would like something a little bit more. I'm not saying that everyone, but there's a segment of Australia that are happy with it, with the current system, but they want a little bit more than either the ceremonial aspect or the vice-regal umpire that sort of plays a role during hung parliaments or constitutional crisis. And I think highlighting that that role that they do, sort of keep the executive on their toes and ask the proper questions is important. I always feel. I think it's always something I throw in an argument too, because I know some Republican or light Republican mates of mine always say, "What's the point? They just have to do whatever the Premier says at the end of the day anyway." But anyway, that's always something I like to throw in. Elliot, what else have we got there, mate? I've seen quite a few more come through.
Well, we do, and I have one question for you, and I want to kind of expand on a question that someone said around educating the nation of the benefits of the Crown. Further to elaborate on this, particularly in your position, what is the opportunity to educate the next generation, our children, of having more focus on the Crown and explaining our system of constitutional monarchy within the Australian curriculum? Is there scope, or it's almost as if it's been systematically removed? Is that right?
Well, it has, Elliot, and yes, that's right. So we would ensure that, if we're given the opportunity, we'll ensure that if we're having these discussions about reviewing the curriculum, kids have to know our history. They have to know the good parts of the history, the bad parts of the history, and then we have to be able to trust students and individuals as they grow older to make what they will of the history, whether they agree or disagree with it. It is our history and it happened. So that's important, and that I think would form part of the review. It concerns me that, I go to every election, not only my election, but at the federal election and the local council elections when I'm handing out vote cards for individuals, and people have no idea of what level of government they're voting for. I often get asked, how was Canberra? I said, I don't know. I haven't been to Canberra for 10 years. Parliament is in Queensland, and I don't sit in the federal parliament. But so there is I would love to see civil education really enforced. Some schools do it brilliantly, and some schools just don't do it at all. And I do have a sense, not only in our university sector, but in our education sector, where there is, I get lots of parents contacting me with concerns of a particular bias one way, in terms of not only history, but of teachings. And that can't be the case. You've got to educate someone properly, you've got to give them all sides and then trust that they will make up their mind of what they want to know or what they want to believe or do in the future. But you've got to give them a fully rounded education, because without both sides, they're not getting that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, we do have other questions, but I think we should start wrapping it up now.
All right, well, let's ask one more, and then we'll start wrapping up. Hey, I saw a good one there. I don't know the.
Yeah.
Oh, you okay? Sure, I can be the OIC, mate. There was one there. Let me find it by Jeff, which I wouldn't mind knowing the answer to myself, actually. So that's all I wanted to do.
About experiencing pushback.
Yes, that's it. Yep, I've just got it. Hi, Jarrod. This is from Jeff S. Hi, Jarrod. You mentioned that you experienced pushback when you endeavoured to name the courts of law after Her Majesty the Queen. Could you please elaborate which end this was received from? Was it politicians or the other?
Well, not from politicians on my side of politics. Certainly, Labor wouldn't appreciate it. Many judges push back, I can say. So the Department of Justice sent every courthouse in Queensland a new portrait of Her Majesty to display, and we put a requirement that it gets displayed somewhere on the precinct of the courthouses. We got pushback, but we prevailed at the end of the day.
Fantastic.
Terrific. Look, ladies and gentlemen, should I be... Elliot, you sound like you want me to... I'll wrap it up. I probably should. We could go for hours.
Yeah,
we could go for hours.
Then I'll close with some closing music.
Tremendous. Well, I'll wrap up. Look, just before I do, I will throw it if Philip has any thing he'd like to add very briefly in a tick. But just before I do throw to Philip, I just want to thank Jarrod for taking the time tonight to join us on our semi-regular Zoom sessions. Jarrod is obviously, as I said earlier, a big supporter of the cause, and he's an honorary life member. We gave him that honour on behalf of our membership when he was in government, because quite simply, we've found in our years, well, I've been involved with the league for 12 years now, and obviously Philip a lot longer. But we've found whenever we needed to campaign or lobby for something, we've always had to make the approach. And it was actually quite the opposite with Jarrod. There's a period of time there when he was in office where he would call us and say, what can I do? What's a good way to promote the cause and the monarchy? And so we saw no better way to sort of honour him than give him an honorary lifetime membership to the league. And so I guess what I'd like to do tonight, we are officially a non-partisan organisation. I've spoken about this before at some of our events. However, we unashamedly support those who support our constitution. In Queensland, October 31 this year, which actually happens to be Halloween, which is quite an interesting auspicious date to hold an election. At Halloween this year is the next state election. So I would argue actually for the cause and indeed the league and also Jarrod that we need to do whatever we can to support him and other monarchist members. We do at all elections send out reminders to our membership and supporters across the nation to remind them, because obviously we are a voluntary organisation. We can't approach especially at a federal election, we can't approach every single candidate. We do try and do so on the state level. At these state elections, to approach your local candidate and find out where they stand on the issue. We know where Jarrod stands on this issue. We know where Dr. Christian Rowan stands on this issue. And of course, we had an apology this evening from the Attorney General for Tasmania, who's also a life member, Elise Archer. So although we are a non-partisan organisation, we will work with anyone, no matter their political colours. We've had, in fact, on our National Council is Joe Bullock, former Labor Senator in the Federal Parliament. So if anyone would be able to and is willing to help Mr. Bleijie, Dr. Rowan, in a few months' time, it's less than 3 months now, to that very important election, I'd ask you to get in touch with the league and we can put you in touch with the relevant campaign officials. So of course, our general sort of email is secretary@monarchist.org.au. Mine is brand.rippon@monarchist.org.au. I'm the Queensland chair. Other than that, Mr. Benwell sent me a very sneaky text then. I will throw back to you, Jarrod. Mr. Benwell sent me a very sneaky text saying he doesn't have anything to add, but I'll take that cheeky grin as I shouldn't have actually read it, that he sent me a text. But anyway, no, Philip, you're good. Jarrod, do you have something
I wanted to say thank you to you and Elliot and Philip for helping with the time. Sorry, my mic dropped out there. I did have a flick through those questions though, and there was a good question from Bill Woods, if I may.
Sure, please.
He said there he has a query about the restoration of QCs. Considering the Australia Act provides a state premier may provide advice directly to the Queen, what was the problem? The problem, if I recall correctly, was that there was an agreement that Keating had signed way back when, and they had basically given effect to that the communications to the palace will go through the Governor General office, and that's what we basically said, well, we're not abided by that agreement. We have our, we're a sovereign state, so we just didn't follow the protocol that had been established. And I think it had been established and was ingrained in the system because no one challenged it until we came along. And we said we're going to challenge it, and we did. And so then from then on, all our communications with the palace went through our own governor, and we, out of courtesy, I think, CC'd the Governor General so they could know what we're up to. But no, we challenged it and were successful in that.
Tremendous. I could spend all night here, Jarrod, honestly, talking about this, but we've probably got to call it. I've got a few people messaging me direct saying, wouldn't mind these sessions going for longer. Well, this is fantastic. Well, anyone that's in Queensland will have to come along to the next Monarchist League function we have up here, and hopefully we'll get Jarrod along there too, and he can chew his ear off and get the inside goss. And hopefully it'll be Mr. Bleijie then too by the time you come along, Jarrod. Well, on that bombshell on that note, I think I will wrap up, Elliot, unless there's anything else administratively you see on your end, good sir.
That's fine. I'm just going to close with the Royal Anthem and hopefully a video presentation. So thank you all for attending.
Tremendous. Thanks, guys.